Well, good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. My name is Sharon Squire, and I am a member of the Board of Directors at the Ottawa branch of the National Association for Federal Retirees. And today I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the National Association of Federal Retirees, Ottawa branch, is located is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And on behalf of the branch, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's session, an advanced care planning workshop organized by Compassionate Ottawa. I'm pleased to welcome our two co-facilitators, Leslie McDermott and Mac Evans, who you can see on your screen, who will be leading our workshop today. I'd also like to thank Melissa and Christina of Compassionate Ottawa, who have helped to organize the session today. Veuillez noter que le webinaire sera présenté en anglais, mais la participation bilingue est toujours encouragée. And again, welcome to our members, and thank you for being an active part of our community. I would also like to welcome those who are not yet members of our association, and we hope that these webinars and the other benefits of membership will inspire you to join us. So just a few organizational details for our webinar today. Everyone will be muted during the session, except for when we move into breakout groups. And I'm sure there'll be questions that will come to mind during the session today. So please put them in the chat. And our facilitators will either talk to them during the session, and we'll also have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. And you can find the chat button in the bottom corner of your Zoom. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Leslie and Mac.
Great, thank you very much. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cough, so I'm going to try and mute myself when I cough, but I may not always get to the button. Mac and I wanted to just take a moment to introduce ourselves. So I'm Leslie. I've been involved with Compassionate Ottawa for, well, since before the pandemic, so I guess that's going on at least 4 years at this point. And I got involved 4 or 5 years ago because my parents at the time were 90 years old. And I felt like we had not had conversations about what kind of care they wanted, what was important to them. And it was very difficult. They would always just say, oh, well, you'll know what to do, which I didn't really know what to do. So this gave me the opportunity to learn about having conversations, how to get those started, why it was important. And it has been helpful. Both my parents, 5 years later, are still alive. They're 95 at this point, soon to be 96. And it has come in helpful, particularly for my mother, because she is not doing well, and decisions have to be made for her. So that's what sort of brought me into the Compassionate Ottawa family, and it was really very personal. And now I just hope to kind of share some of what has been helpful for me to others. So I'll turn it over to Mac now to introduce himself.
Thanks, Leslie. I'm a longtime public servant and a proud member of the organization, so I'm pleased to participate here. I joined Compassionate Ottawa right at the beginning because I'm a longtime friend of one of the originators, Jim Mininger, and we had a group discussion about living well and dying well, and out of this conversation came the desire to create Compassionate Ottawa. So it's come to be quite a useful thing. I've enjoyed giving these presentations because I get to meet all sorts of people, and hopefully we get to get people thinking about the advanced care planning process. Having lived through the loss of parents on both my sides of the family, and my brother's 2 wives who have died of cancer, I know from experience how important it is to do this advanced care planning. So I'm very pleased to be here, and we're looking forward to talking to everybody.
Great, thanks, Mac. So I'm going to give us a quick overview of our agenda, how we're going to spend the next hour and a half. We're going to talk a little bit about Compassionate Ottawa, who we are and why we exist. We're going to unpack what advanced care planning is all about. We're going to break into some small groups partway through and have some conversations about what our values are, our wishes, our beliefs, what's important to us, and how this can relate to healthcare decisions. We're going to come back from those small groups and be able to share a little bit about what that was like, any learnings, any thoughts people have about that. We'll talk about substitute decision makers and powers of attorney for personal care. And at the end, we'll give a summary and provide an overview of the resources that will be sent to you. I'd like to thank Sharon for acknowledging the land that we are doing this workshop on. Thank you for doing that. So we'll move on now to talk a little bit about Compassionate Ottawa and what Compassionate Ottawa is. So just to, it's been existing for a number of years now. We've done different kinds of research projects, but I think I'll just focus on the reason we exist and the relationship to these workshops. So Compassionate Ottawa is a citizen-led, primarily volunteer organization. And our aim is to support people in living well as they approach the end of life, and to support those folks and the people that care for them in dying, death, loss, and bereavement. And we believe that the way to do this is to strengthen the capacity of people to care for each other in times of serious illness and loss. And so that's why having these conversations is important. I think for many of us, there is a discomfort around death that can really isolate not only the people that are dying, but those of us that care for them as well. So the hope of Compassionate Ottawa is that having these conversations about dying and death will help us better look after ourselves, our loved ones, and members of our communities. We subscribe to something called the Compassionate City Charter, which basically outlines the role of civic governments, public institutions, private and community organizations in creating compassionate communities. So these are communities that embrace diversity, inclusion, equity, voice. And we want to play a part in that around this area of conversations around death, dying, loss, and bereavement. And so we hope to share over time through some of the research projects that we've done, what we've learned, what our successes have been, what some of our failures have been, so that we can kind of build this movement within our own community, but also share it with others. So I would say our three main focuses are assisting people, which is what we're doing today, to really think about death and dying so that they can be better prepared as they move into the end of life, or possibly sickness, or by chance an accident, and really communicate what's important to them, to friends, family, and a substitute decision maker. The other thing that's really important to us is to engage diverse communities. So there are many diverse communities within Ottawa where conversations about death and dying will be different. Approaches will be different. And so our hope is to work with the diversity within Ottawa to help communities have kind of relevant and appropriate conversations. And finally, like today, working with public service retirees, we want to work with partners, be it governments, faith institutes, community organizations that have a common interest to make more common, make more easy this kind of a conversation around what's important as we approach the end of our life. So you can learn more about Compassionate Ottawa. I won't go into any more detail here, but you can visit our website at compassionateottawa.ca. I'll turn it over to Mac.
Thank you, Leslie. So why are we doing this particular activity, these advanced care planning sessions? There are some, to me anyways, frightening statistics that are on the slide there. A lot of Canadians are thinking about end-of-life care, but only 20% have an advanced care plan. So we're in the thinking phase, but we're not in the acting phase. And part of what we're trying to do here in Compassionate Ottawa is to encourage people to move into the acting phase. There's another one in a Globe and Mail article, Andre Picard, who writes an awful lot about healthcare issues. It's indicated that at end of life, approximately 90% of Canadians would benefit from palliative care, but only less about 15% are actually getting it. So we have a great big gap in people's expectations and what actually occurs. And as Leslie mentioned, one of the things that Compassionate Ottawa is really trying to do is to bring the capacity of the community to help in as people cope with end-of-life issues. The thing to remember throughout this whole presentation is advanced care planning is not about making decisions right now. It's all about preparing for a time when you may not be able to make your own healthcare decisions because of a lack of mental capacity. So this is a planning process. It's a way in which you can make your views, your values, and your expectations for end-of-life care known to someone who you will nominate to be the person to make decisions for you, and who has the ability and understanding to carry out your wishes. So this is a way in which you can ensure to the best possible way that your expectations for end of life are going to be met. Now, this process that we started at Compassionate Ottawa with advanced care planning started before COVID, but when COVID came along, it really intensified the importance and urgency of getting people to think about advanced care planning. Again, quoting Andre Picard, he talks about the rate of deaths in institutionalized care, and where Canada was amongst the worst in the world. I think we all know this. We've read the newspapers, we've seen the issues. Two of the key lessons that we learned that were heightened, I guess, through the COVID crisis is that home is a safe place to be, and home is where most people want to be at end of life. But home care and the ability to cope with end of life requires more than the healthcare system. It requires a community of people and people who are willing to able to help in the process. And that's what advanced care planning is really all about. The next slide shows a little cartoon that we show all the time. This is Snoopy and Charlie Brown. Where Charlie Brown is saying, "Snoopy, someday we will all die." And Snoopy, with his great wisdom, says, "True, but on all the other days we will live." And advanced care planning is all about these other days. It's really trying to articulate what's important to you in your life. What do you value? How do you wish to live your life as you approach the end of life? And who is going to act on your behalf to make sure your wishes are carried out? Advanced care planning applies to everybody, and everybody should be giving good, serious consideration to doing some advanced care planning. And we hope that today's session will help you think about this process and help you move along the path to creating your own advanced care plan. So Leslie, back to you.
So you can see a slide. Just go to the previous slide if you could. That slide just indicates three kind of parts of decision making. So I'm going to just run through, and Mac has already spoken to this a little bit, but I'll just run through it again and talk a little bit about what distinguishes advanced care planning conversation from goals of care conversations or discussions, and then consent for treatment. In the context of advanced care planning, that umbrella section at the top, these are conversations that someone has while they're still mentally capable, often quite healthy, that identifies what's important to them. What are their wishes, their values, their beliefs, should they become ill or have serious injury through an accident or be approaching dying? What's important to them? What kind of things would they want? So it's kind of an overarching before any real crisis or any need. And it's important in this advanced care planning to share these thoughts and feelings and wishes with family and friends, but also with the substitute decision maker, the person that would be making decisions on your behalf. So advanced care planning is looking forward before there is a need, while one can think about what would be important to them. Goals of care discussions are when someone needs treatment or there are treatment options available. These are conversations that take place between a person and a healthcare provider. So if you are unable to make decisions for yourself, that discussion around treatment and care options is going to happen between the healthcare provider and your substitute decision maker. What advanced care planning does is it gives your substitute decision maker information. It helps guide them to make decisions that would be similar to the ones that you would make for yourself. So advanced care planning is identifying what's important to you, your values, your beliefs, your wishes. Goals of care discussions are with a healthcare provider when different treatment options are being laid out on the table, and ultimately a decision for a treatment option or refusal of a treatment option is going to be required. So the very bottom, the point of that triangle, consent for treatment, again, is a conversation with a healthcare provider when a decision is required so that treatment will be provided. It's a question of somebody consenting to what that treatment is going to be. In the cases of a person who isn't capable, then again, it's their substitute decision maker. So in Ontario, the law requires that healthcare providers get informed consent or refusal if you don't want treatment before providing a patient with any treatment or care. So, if you are going to be receiving a treatment, your healthcare provider has to tell you about your illness, about what you can do to treat this ailment, at the various options for treatment, what the risks and the benefits are, what would happen should you choose no treatment at all. And then you have a right to make a decision, take whichever treatment you choose, or refuse all of the offered treatments. It's a basic right for you to decide what healthcare you receive. The only time this doesn't hold true is in an emergency. So sometimes somebody's brought into an emergency room and something has to be done right away to save someone's life or alleviate discomfort or pain. And there is no substitute decision maker around to provide consent. In those cases, a health care provider can provide some sort of treatment option without consent. So just to kind of summarize that, these advanced care planning conversations are with people that are important to you, and in particular, your substitute decision maker, the person that will make decisions about your health care if you're unable to. So these are things that help them make a decision when they're talking to your healthcare provider. So you would be talking to them perhaps about Things like how much pain you're willing to endure, how important it is that you be able to use your limbs, who you would want around should you be actually going to be in the last few days of your life. So things that would help them make decisions on your behalf. Goals of care is going to be when they talk to a healthcare practitioner, and it's going to be very helpful to know what's important to you. And then they can ultimately make a decision for you that would have been similar to the decision you would have made for yourself had you been able to do that. So next slide, in terms of advanced care planning, there are really two important elements of advanced care planning. The first is identifying who your substitute decision maker is. So that's the person or people who will make healthcare decisions for you in the event that you're mentally incapable of making them for yourself. And as a subset of that, you need to make sure that the person you're identifying as your substitute decision maker agrees to do it. So sometimes people think, oh, that person, but you have to go to them and say, do you agree to do this? And then you need to start having conversations with them about what's important to you. So as Mac mentioned, these things should happen long before there's a crisis or an event. Life is really unpredictable. You don't know what tomorrow will bring. So ideally, people are doing this early on. I have children that are, well, now they're in their 30s, but there's not you can be doing these conversations in your teens or in your 20s. You don't need to wait until you're 50 or 60, because again, if an accident can happen at any time. So it's important to do these sooner than later, and also to continue to have the conversations, because things can change. So we're going to focus a little bit on having the conversation and why it's important for your substitute decision maker to know what's important to you. So I'm going to take a story from a book. It's a true story from a book that was written by Dr. Atul Gawande. It's a book called Being Mortal. I read it probably, 5 or 6 years ago, but I would recommend it as an interesting read that really helps us think about what's important to us, and sharing that with our friends, family, and substitute decision maker. So this is a story from his book. Dr. Gawande had a friend, Susan, whose dad was facing a decision about having surgery to remove a tumor in his spinal cord. And this surgery had a 20% risk of leaving him a quadriplegic. His daughter, Susan, was his substitute decision maker if he could no longer make decisions for himself. And she sat at his bedside the night before surgery, and she asked him, what he was worried about, what, if something terrible should happen, what if it didn't go well and he was a quadriplegic, and just a general conversation about his thoughts about this surgery and the outcome. And he said to her, I can endure a lot of pain. That doesn't trouble me. I'm willing to undergo almost anything as long as I can still watch football on television and eat chocolate ice cream. Now, you can imagine she was a little bit blown away by this, but she accepted that that's what was important to him. That was what he was prioritizing. So the next day, her dad went into surgery, went through the operation, came out, was initially doing quite well, but then had bleeding, which was leaving him with encroaching quadriplegia. So the surgeon came to Susan, because at this point, her father cannot make the decision, and asked, should they take him back to the operating room or not when the reality was at that point, he was going to come out a quadriplegic no matter what they did. So she realized that she had the answer. She asked the surgeon, will he still be able to eat ice cream and watch football on television? And the surgeon answered, yes. So she signed to have him go into surgery. Now, if Susan hadn't had that conversation with her father, almost any answer she would have given would have really been difficult for her, probably the rest of her life. If she'd said no and he died, she'd maybe be second guessing that. If she'd said yes and then saw how painful and difficult it was for him to go through rehab, again, she may have regretted that. So no matter what her decision, without the conversation with her dad, she would have likely second guessed herself. Whereas having had that conversation with her dad, it guided her to make a decision similar to the one he would have made for himself. Now, he did quite well over the next few years. He had some quite difficult rehab, but lived for another 7 or 8 years, was able to go back. He was the writer, did a number of papers and another book. At some point, 7 or 8 years later, he did become very weakened and he was no longer able to eat. And he made a decision, because at this point he was able to, he made a decision that he did not want feeding tubes, and he ended up going home with hospice care and died about 5 days later without food or water, as he had chosen. And his family was around him at the time, and they felt good about the fact that he was able to make the decision in terms of his dying, and also that he was able to have those extra 7 or 8 years because Susan had been able to make a decision that was reflective of the decision he would have made for himself. So I want us just to kind of start thinking about what's important to you. What would be the things that would be important to you? It's almost like asking, what would your football and ice cream must-haves be? And we're going to move into some conversations that Mac will introduce us to that just let you start thinking about what's important to you. What do you value? What would you want someone to know if they ultimately had to make decisions for you? Mac?
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. That's a very powerful story that you just related, and I think it illustrates very clearly the importance of having these conversations. We will get into later on, in case you're asking in your own mind, well, what is an advanced care plan and how do you do this? We'll get into that mechanics later on, but I think following Leslie's story there and the importance of identifying your values, your wishes for end-of-life care, that we will engage here now in an exercise on that may help you begin this conversation. These conversations are difficult, and there are many tools available, and this is one of them. It's a little card game that if we were in-person meeting here, we would have a card deck at each table, and on this card deck, on each card would be one of these possible wishes that you might think about, or values that you think resonates with you. I think you were given a copy of what's on the back of all of these cards, so you should have that with you. If not, it'll be up on the screen here in a minute. And these are just a list of 36 statements of some, not all by any means, values and wishes that people may have as they approach end of life. There it is on the screen now. So there's 36 here, and obviously there's a lot more, but these are just one way of attempting to get the discussion going. And what we're going to do is break ourselves into some breakout rooms, I think probably 4, where we'll be together in smaller groups, and we'll go over. You'll have these cards with you. I would like you to look at these 36 things that are on the screen and pick 2 or 3 that really resonate with you. As yeah, that's something that I would really like to see at my end of life. And think about why that's important to you. So 2 things, we're going to ask 3 things during the breakout groups. 1, look at this list, choose a couple that really resonate with you. Think about why it's important to you. And then once you've had a chance to do that in the first 2 or 3 minutes of the breakout, then we'll try to enter into a discussion and have people sitting around the breakout room identify to the group what it was that they chose and why. And this is just a way of hoping to encourage people to undergo this set of discussions. As Leslie's story indicates quite clearly, the daughter being able to understand what her father's wishes were was very, very important in making the right decision when that decision had to be made. So this is just one way. If you decide to proceed with doing an advanced care planning, and after you've chosen your substitute decision maker, having this discussion with them and your family is a very key and important part. It's not a legally documented part at all. It's just you transmitting to the person who's going to make decisions for you if you're unable to, transmitting to them what is important to you so that they can make the best decision on your behalf. So I think we can break out into the little rooms, and there'll be one of us from Compassionate Ottawa in your breakout room, helping moderate you to come to having these discussions. So over to, I guess, Melissa, you're going to break the rooms up for us?
Yeah, so I'm going to do 4 breakout rooms. So you might get a pop-up on your screen just asking you, would you like to go in the room? And then just say yes, and then it will just leave you there automatically.
If you don't want to be in a breakout room, I guess you have the option to say no, and you'll be put on hold until we all come back. So how long are the breakout rooms going to last? 15, 20 minutes?
Yeah, I could bring them back in, let's say, 15 minutes.
I think
Okay.
15 minutes.
And people will be unmuted in these breakout groups.
Yes. So 15 minutes to go through this. It's a good exercise.
Yep, so there'll be about 14 to 15 participants.
What happened? So what did we learn? We had a little technical problem in our group. No one had the Go Wish card list in front of them, so we had to spend some time getting that up. But once it was up, we started a discussion. So I'm going to say in my group, and then we'll have the moderators from the other groups chime in. I think the key thing that comes out of the conversation that we did have, and one that is common to all the other ones I've had before, is that there is no one set of wishes and values that suits all. And so everybody has their own personal views, their own personal situation, and those are the things that are going to dominate the actual list. However, there was quite a strong support in our group for doing this, and viewing the 36 that were from the Go Wish game as a good place to start, to encourage conversations to take place. So that basically is what happened in our group, and some people were able to say what was important to them and why. I think others were just still thinking about it. So that would be our group. So I was in group 3. So who was the moderator for group 1?
Mac, I think I was less a moderator and more of just a sort of shepherder of conversation. So I would invite folks who were part of the group that I was in to share, you know, what they feel comfortable sharing with this group.
Okay, good. I think William McKim is trying to talk, but you're muted. And Dennis, you're still muted too, so. So William McKim and Dennis, you were trying to say something, but you were muted. No? Okay. You wanted to be muted. Okay.
Mac, maybe what I can do is share just a couple of the things that came
Okay.
out in terms of a theme of what was important. So, you know, reviewing some of the Go Wish statements. We heard quite a bit about needing family to be around or wanting to be able to be with family or being surrounded by family. So certainly there was a theme around not being on their own and the importance of family, whether that was grandkids, kids, the larger sort of family theme. Others, you know, their wishes were around traveling, community service, not being a burden. So this idea of if 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 we were in a position where we were unable to take care of ourselves, not expecting that family would step in with in particular the physical care aspects. There was a long or a couple of conversations around control over our lives and making sure that we had choices that were available to us. And then, you know, sort of a tangent around the barriers that exist when trying to have these conversations. That sometimes, although we're open to wanting to discuss, but we have family members, perhaps children, who are not quite as open to wanting to hear or wanting to have a conversation. So there was a little bit of brainstorming about how to perhaps get past that barrier.
That last point is very important. It's probably one of the most important issues is getting people wanting and willing to participate in these discussions. Very good. Thank you, Christine. Okay, so that was group one. Group two?
Well, I was Leslie, I was in group 2, but I'll just open it up to the group in case anyone else would like to give a couple of thoughts about what it was like to have that discussion, and just see if anyone else would like to say something. We had a pretty good discussion, so I'll just wait and see if someone else would like to step in there. Okay, well, let me just go over a couple of things that came out of the group. One was having a discussion with someone like that can be very difficult. One was identifying a substitute decision maker if there isn't anyone, you know, that's obviously around that can do that. That came up. I said that we were going to talk a little bit about getting the conversation going and what actually do powers of attorneys for personal care, what kind of things do they do. So we didn't talk about those in our group, but they came up. And of course, we'll talk about those shortly. I think people had very different ideas about what was important to them. But I do think, you know, it did come up a couple of times, not being a burden on folks. So yeah, I think that's a bit of a summary.
Okay, and then group 4.
I think that was probably the group that I was supposed to be in. But I don't think that I was actually in that group. So if there's anybody who was in group 4 that wanted to share.
Yes, thanks, Melissa. The main thing that we talked about was not wanting to be a burden on our families, not being in pain, hooked up to machines, and making sure that our finances were in order. Those are the things that I remember. Elizabeth or Elizabeth can talk. I can see her. She's unmuted.
Well, the only thing that I had to add to it was the importance of having an advocate, because when you become incapacitated and you can't make decisions, the person who's going to be making those decisions has to know what you want and has to respect the decisions you would want, even though they may not be the decisions they would choose. I just went through this with my husband, and he, I know what he wanted, and I had to make the decisions respecting that it was his death and it was his choice. And I thought that was it's really important. Like I'm having a struggle now figuring out who I'm going to use as an advocate, because there's an awful lot of things with our medical system the way it is right now. There are an awful lot of things that slip, and you need someone who can step in and say, hey, this isn't right, or this isn't, this person needs this or that. There's an awful lot of decisions that need to be made, and I want my values and my choices to be what I would want them to be, not whatever my power of attorney thinks is the right way to go. I want them to share my values. That's why it's important to find that right advocate, someone who can.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Dominic, are you able to unmute? You had a question that you were going to put in chat.
Yes, I don't know if it did. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Okay, so I don't know if it went into the chat. I put it in there. It was the first thing, but maybe it didn't show up. I don't know. Anyways, I was just had a question around. Pardon me?
I saw it.
Oh,
Dominique,
okay. So anyways, that very quickly, I just wanted to say that I'm having difficulty choosing. I'm separated, and so I'm changing now my all my documents, and I'm trying to decide whether I should choose all of my 3 children to be so that my responsible people, or I should just pick one.
We're gonna talk a little bit about that in a few minutes.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Hold that thought. Obviously, it's going to be your decision, but hold that thought.
I have something to add on group 4. Elizabeth, you raised this when you were telling us about the importance of making sure that our papers were easy to find, to make sure that our files were easy, not to have things all on our computer or in a binder, but make sure that the information is all collected together and easy to find for those who have to deal with them.
Yeah, electronic copies are fine, but nothing beats hard copy. When you can hold it in your hand and show it to somebody, you can always digitize it and send it. But if it's electronic, then unless people have access to your passwords and know your filing system and where you put things, whether it's in the cloud, on the hard drive, on on your computer, whatever, it's kind of useless. So putting things in places where they're easy to find for your executors or for your, powers of attorney or whoever.
Yeah, from my personal experience, I can say that's extremely important.
I guess that's it for our group.
I think so as well. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. I think we'll move on now to kind of getting the conversation started. And it can be difficult. I think that came up in the group a couple of times. It can be difficult to bring up the conversation. And how you begin that conversation is going to depend on what's comfortable for you and what's comfortable for the person or the people that that you're talking to. So there are lots of ways to bring it up. We're just going to go through a couple of possibilities on how you might get it started. Some people are quite comfortable with just being right out there. You know, I need your help with something, or my health is good right now, but I want to talk to you about what I'd want if I was sick or needed you to make decisions for me. So those are pretty direct ways of beginning the conversation. But you can also use just a recent experience. So this workshop can be a good way to say, I was in a workshop today and we talked about advanced care planning. And the more I think about it, the more important it is I share with people what's going to be important to me as I may be approaching the end of my life. The Go Wish cards, I mean, you have the list, but that can also be a good way to get the conversation started and open it up for everybody to share what's important. The benefit of that is people sometimes realize that they hold different things of importance or value. And it's important then that people can recognize that what one person thinks isn't what someone else might want. You can kind of blame it on someone else. You know, you could say, I was at the doctor's today and they asked me, had I had any advanced care planning conversations with friends or family? Did I know who my substitute decision maker was in order to make sure they had the information to make the best decisions possible for me that would be reflective of what I would want? Sometimes, I mean, I think this happened more when we were in the midst of COVID, but even now, sometimes in the newspapers, you see these predicaments where families can't agree, you know, should they take someone off life support or not? And the people that have the decision-making power can't agree. And sometimes it ends up in front of a judge. That's another way to begin the conversation. I want you to know what I would want because I never want to put you in that position and I want to have my wishes met. So there are a number of ways to bring it up. It's really, I think, finding what's comfortable for you. I think a lot of us have been met with, when we bring it up, we're met with, oh, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about you dying. You're healthy. Why are we even going there? And I think sometimes you have to bring it back to this conversation is about you as a person wanting to ensure that your wishes get met. And it's because you trust that person. You believe that they could act on your behalf, that you want to share this with them. So, you know, you have to play it, I think, in what's comfortable for you and knowing a little bit about the person that you're talking to. And the other thing is a slow start isn't bad. You can start this very slowly and work at it over time. It isn't a conversation that's going to happen all in one sitting. So moving on to the next slide. Imagine you're at the hospital, too ill or hurt to speak for yourself. Do you know who would make healthcare decisions for you? So to answer this slide, that person would be your substitute decision maker. So if you're facing the situation imagined in this slide, it means that you would not be considered mentally capable to make a decision for yourself. So in Ontario, the law defines capacity as having the ability to understand information that has to do with making a decision about a treatment. It also might be related to personal services or admission into various healthcare facilities. So it's being able to understand the information that has to do with those things and having the mental capacity to appreciate the consequences of any decision or lack thereof. So that's how we define in Ontario mental capacity. If you're not mentally capable, the healthcare practitioner will turn to another person, and that person is going to be your substitute decision maker, and they will speak for you and make decisions for your care. So advanced care planning lets you know who would speak for you, and it would also ensure that they had information about what was important to you to assist them in making decisions. Healthcare practitioners need to turn to a person. They cannot turn to a piece of paper in Ontario. They must turn to a person to make decisions. Now, writing it down is very, very helpful for your substitute decision maker, but the healthcare provider will go to a person. So we talked a bit about this in our small group, and I'll just spend a few minutes here. There's some important, I think the woman who spoke just a few minutes ago spoke to this really eloquently. There's some important things to consider when deciding who you want to be your substitute decision maker. First of all, will they honor your wishes and instructions, even if they differ from their own, even if it's not what they would do? Will they be a strong advocate? Do they have the personality to really advocate on your behalf? And will they be an advocate grounded by your wishes, based on your best interest? Are they comfortable in healthcare settings? A lot of people, they see a white coat and they freeze up. Are they comfortable in these kinds of settings so that they will speak up, that they will be an advocate? Can they be calm and level-headed in a crisis? Can they handle conflict should it arrive? Perhaps you have a substitute decision maker who is not your children, but your children disagree. Your substitute decision maker has agreed to honor your wishes. So again, are they able to deal with conflict should it arise? So a question came up, and I can't go into great detail here, but a question came up about what do substitute decision makers do? Like if you have somebody that's power of attorney for personal care, which is your substitute decision maker, what kind of things do they do? Well, they consent to any kind of treatments, any kind of tests, any kind of surgeries, any kind of procedures. They're going to be consenting to those because you can't. They can refuse treatment, or they can withdraw life-prolonging measures. They can consent to admission or discharge from various medical facilities. They can decide on personal care or long-term care services or facilities. So there's a significant amount that they can do if you are in a medical crisis, if you have an accident, if you're elderly and or dying. There's a number of decisions that they will then become responsible for. So let me ask you, who here has a substitute decision maker? As it turns out, we all have a substitute decision maker. The Healthcare Consent Act outlines a hierarchy, kind of a list of your possible automatic substitute decision makers. We're going to send you a booklet at the end of this session today called Speak Up. And so it'll be included in your resources, and you're going to be able to see the list of automatic substitute decision makers in that book. And they're ranked. There's a hierarchy. There's who's going to be the automatic if they exist. If that person doesn't exist, what's the next level? And they will be your substitute decision maker. So let me just give you a quick example. Excuse me. If you have a partner, or maybe you're married, it's automatically going to be your partner or your spouse, automatically. Let's say you were married or had a partner, but now you don't. They've died or you're split up. It is going to change automatically. Well, it won't change if the substitute decision maker has not been changed and you have it in writing. But if you've split up, then it's going to fall to your children. If you don't have children, it's going to fall to the next family member. So there are automatic substitute decision makers, and there's a few criteria that people have to meet. Obviously, they they have to have the mental capacity, 16 or older, they have to agree to do it. You know, there are some criteria. If there are 2 or more persons, for example, 3 children, described in that same subsection of the hierarchy. So let's say it's a woman, her husband has passed away, she has 3 children. Those 3 children, assuming they all meet the requirements, they will share the decision making. They may choose to designate one of them, but they may share the decision making. If every now and then there's a disagreement among kind of these equally ranked decision makers that can't be resolved and a decision needs to be made, it can be moved to the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee to make the decision. Somebody was just talking about, you know, I've got these 3 children, I don't know what I should do. I'm just going to give you an example, and of course it's different for everybody. I know someone who has, in fact, 3 children, and she's a widow. And under the hierarchy, they would be her automatic substitute decision makers. And she felt that that was not a good idea. She felt that one was too far removed, and one was extremely emotional and would find it very difficult to make decisions that would align with what she wanted. So she actually chose one of her children, got a power of attorney for personal care, and identified them as her substitute decision maker because she felt that they would be more likely to be able to make decisions that would reflect what she would actually want. So, you know, you have automatic substitute decision makers, but just think about, is that the person you would want? And if not, then you would want to move on to change that. And Mac will talk a little bit about that now.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. And I can relate to the when it comes to this. I have one of my daughters is she's a doctor, and so she comes at this from a very clinical medical point of view. I have another daughter who's in the emotional side of things and would come at it from that point of view. And so right now we have the 2 of them, but as we go, we keep it that way for the various reasons that Leslie just in that hierarchy that Leslie mentioned. At the top of the list is, if you're under some guardian, then they become it. But if the next one on the list is your own personal substitute decision maker, which you have made, the only way you can make that is through a power of attorney for personal care, and which is what we're talking about here. If you don't make a power of attorney for personal care and do not designate your chosen substitute decision maker, then, as Leslie stated, it goes down through the list. If you don't have any children or any family members, then it goes to the government to make the decision for you. And so the last resort is the government. So I think most of us would rather have our own wishes reflected in our own choice of who do we want as our substitute decision maker. And so, as I said earlier, having the power of attorney for personal care is the only way in which you can create the designation of your substitute decision maker. Now, this is different from the power of attorney for property, i.e. your finances. And so we have to keep clear in our minds that these are 2 different documents. There are some, how you do this, you can get a form for filling out and making sure all the right information is there. You can write up your own. You don't need a lawyer for this, but you do have to have it signed by yourself. where you sign it in the presence of two witnesses, and then they sign it as well. So it has to be a witnessed document where signatures are necessary, but it does not have to be one which goes through the legal system. Now, there's some criteria for who can be a substitute decision maker. The biggest one probably is that they can't be someone who's, they have to be at arm's length, the witnesses for your document. So you can't have your spouse sign it as a witness, for example. They have to be 16 years old. I just saw a question in the chat room come up, was do they have to be living in Canada? I don't see here anywhere that that's a stipulation. But in the document that Leslie referred to that you will be getting, they go through all of this in terms of what are the requirements, but it's actually quite a simple document. It just needs to have these signatures.
I just want to add one thing because it came up in our group and it's kind of related here, is that your substitute decision maker via automatic or power of attorney for personal care does not have to reside in Canada. They do have to be able to give an in-person decision, which means that they can use a phone, they can use a Zoom. They just have to be able to give that in-person consent.
Yeah, good point. So that answers that question. Other than that, you're free to choose whomever you wish. It doesn't have to be a family member. It can be a friend. It can be just basically anybody. But the key point here is you need to do it. And you need, if you want to have someone that you trust making decisions for you, you need to choose that person. And then you have to go through the process that we started with the Go Wish game, which is to try and convey to your substitute decision maker the values and your interests and your instructions as best as you can in terms of how you wish to be treated. So it's a very important document and part of this overall advanced care planning, and there are a lot of resources available, and they'll be part of what we will show you later in terms of what we'll give you at the end of this session.
We're into our last 5 minutes, just as a heads
Yep.
up. Okay,
So that's it for me.
Okay, I'll just quickly, if you live alone, it can be difficult to identify who might be, you don't have any family, etc. So sometimes, it's a community center or faith group, someone through that. I know someone who met someone through a book club, and it was actually a book on death and dying, where she got to know this person and in the end asked them to be her substitute decision maker. So it's kind of thinking outside the box if you find that you don't have anyone that is close to you in terms of family or friends. So very quickly, just to go through the steps of advanced care planning. The first is just to think about what's important to you. What are your wishes, your values, belief? What's super important to you? The next would be to learn about your overall health. For instance, if you have a chronic condition, perhaps you have some sort of heart condition or cancer, then you may know what the trajectory is, what the path is, and you may want to learn about your condition because it may involve specific treatments or treatments you choose not to have. So it's learning about your overall health, particularly if there are things within your family or conditions that are existing for you. You need to decide on your substitute decision maker. That's the person or people that are going to speak on your behalf. You need to look through that hierarchy and say, okay, I'm okay with that automatic person. If you're not, you need to go through the power of attorney and identify them. You need to make sure they are agreeing to do it. And then you need to talk to them about what's important to you so that they can best act on your behalf. Finally, you can record these things. Again, a healthcare practitioner has to go to a person, not a piece of paper. But by recording it, you can help your substitute decision maker have something in front of them to remind them about what's important to you. And of course, you need to put that somewhere they can find it or make sure they have a copy. And because it's an ongoing conversation, you may need to update that copy from time to time. So just a couple of things to remember if we're looking at what is the most important thing to take away from today. The first is, as long as you are able to understand and communicate, you're going to make your own healthcare decisions. You're going to be in control. You're going to make those decisions. However, if you're not able, advanced care planning conversations will guide your substitute decision maker to make decisions similar to those you would have made yourself if you were able. So advanced care planning is not just a one-time conversation. It's going to be ongoing because things change. And finally, conversations get a little bit easier the more you have them. So I'd just like to leave you with that because I know we want to speak very briefly about the resources.
Yes, right. So this is where you can find us, but we will be sending out some resource sheets and where you can find other literature following this workshop, so that you will you'll have further information, particularly the Speak Out book, and there are others that we have, and there'll be a sheet which you'll get, which puts all of this together, where you know where to go to find the information, further information on the subjects that we talked about. So I'm going to leave it at that since we're running out of time. And so you'll get this email with the resources, and you'll also get an evaluation survey. We're very keen at that at Passion Ottawa, of getting evaluations in on the things that we do so that we can make the next session even better. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Christina.
Okay, well, thank you, Compassionate Ottawa. Thank you, Leslie, Mac, Christina, and Melissa for today's workshop. And as Mac said, there's always a follow-up email with information on how to access the recording of today's session, as well as the resources that Mac and Leslie mentioned. So I know personally, I found it really informative, the 36 things to think about, the conversation starters, the substitute decision makers, among many other topics were really helpful for me. So thank you. And members, once again, thank you for attending today. And remember, you can always invite non-members to our webinars and learn more about our association. And there are a lot of interesting webinars coming up, so be sure to go to our Ottawa branch website and have a look. We'll also to make sure that we include that website address in our follow-up email. So once again, thank you for attending, and thank you, Mac and Leslie, for the wonderful presentation. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks
Great.
for participating with us.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye.